chapter 1 of One Piece, one of the very first pieces of dialogue we're treated to are the iconic last words of Pirate King Goldie Roger. "Ore no zaihou ka hoshikeri ya kurete yaru ze. Sagashite miro. Kono yo no subete wo soko ni oite kita." Which of course translates as, "My treasure, if you want it, you can have it. Search for it. I left everything I have in the world there, in that place." Or some variation of that. The different English translations in both the anime and the manga subtly change things here and there. However, regardless of that, as it turns out, these were not Roger's original last words. In the prototype manuscript for chapter 1 of One Piece, Roger's infamous dialogue spoke more about the One Piece itself, and Roger said that his treasure could, quote, "buy the world," very much pushing the nature of the One Piece treasure itself more into the realm of material goods. And if you were to take the statement at face value, then you would be expecting the world's largest pile of gold and jewels or something. But you could also read into the word buy with a less transactional emphasis and say that Roger meant that this treasure would allow you to claim the world, which is very much in line with what we currently know of the One Piece. Vegapunk has said that the fate of the world will rest in the hands of the person who lays claim to the One Piece. However, I do think that Eiichiro Oda quite wisely changed Roger's original words because it transforms the idea of the One Piece into something more vague. It increases the mystery and even causes readers, watchers, and in-world characters to question whether or not there even is a One Piece. I think the most important thing here, though, was to not give away the purpose of the One Piece, as it's only now, almost 1,200 chapters later, that we have this information. And knowing that the One Piece gives someone the power to decide the fate of the planet so early on in East Blue would kind of ruin the romance of the Romance Dawn, because back then it's supposed to be about Luffy, the Straw Hats, and their dreams, rather than the bigger picture fate of the world business. However, with that said, this original Roger line is in the manga. It's just not said by Roger. Big News Morgans may be the world's first and finest hacker in One Piece, always tapping into them secure snail networks to extract the biggest of news from the most secretive of sources. And look, if I was a world government, then I would be keen on protecting my privacy with the sponsor of this video, Proton VPN. Privacy is a fundamental human right, and it's gotten to the point where I cannot imagine using the internet without a VPN. With the great thing about Proton VPN being that it's based in Switzerland, meaning that my data is protected by all of the strict laws that Swiss citizens enjoy. So I can get all of the benefits of Switzerland without needing to speak any of their 4 languages. Proton VPN is extremely easy and intuitive to use, as it essentially encrypts your internet traffic and protects it from prying eyes, as well as allows you to unlock content typically subject to geo-blocking like TV shows, movies, sports, and even news. And with 15,000 servers in 122 countries, Proton VPN ensures high-speed, reliable connections wherever you are, as well as routes traffic through extra hardened servers in Switzerland, Iceland, or Sweden before it leaves their network, adding that extra layer of privacy. The other very important thing about Proton VPN is that it runs on subscriptions. There is no venture capital and there is no collecting and selling of your personal data. The only people that they answer to is you. So you can and should click my link in the description to check out Proton VPN, which is available on all devices, and Proton VPN also offers a 100% free plan with no data or speed limits, no ads, and no catches, bringing private and secure internet access to everyone. So definitely give Proton VPN a go, but for now it's back to you, me. In chapter 22, the other Gaimon chapter, which seemed like filler at the time but continues to become weirdly important in retrospect, Gaimon tells Luffy to find the One Piece and to, quote, "buy the world," using the exact same words that Roger said in the original manuscript. So why does that work here in chapter 22 and not with Roger in chapter 1? I think it's because Gaimon is an unreliable source. He doesn't know anything about where the One Piece is. He's just a dude in a box. So you can very sneakily use him to give away the answer to the question without drawing too much attention. Although for us English speakers, it was never given away, as this line is completely lost in translation and Gaimon instead says, "Now go find the One Piece and make the world your oyster." And I can see why they did that. It's, I was going to say kind of the same. It's not really. But to be completely fair to them, the literal English dialogue would have sounded a bit weird. And it does get close to the non-literal interpretation of buying the world is your oyster, but it's, it's not having it. But knowing that Gaimon was speaking Roger's original words does make me feel like it's a bit of a shame to have lost that connection. Not that the English translators in the mid-2000s could have possibly known how weirdly important this one-off Bush in a Boxes line was going to be 2 decades into the future. But I really want to keep this line in the back of our minds for when we do eventually find the One Piece, because I think it's going to make a frustrating amount of sense in retrospect that the One Piece gives you the ability to buy the world. And it's quite difficult to overstate the importance of dialogue in chapter 1 of this series in general. It is the document that laid the foundation of One Piece, and one that keeps being referred back to almost like a sacred text even now almost 3 decades on. And something rather special was originally planned for chapter 1000. This was the chapter where Luffy hit Kaido with the red rock, and the final line of the chapter was, "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm the man who will surpass you to be king of the pirates." You know, your very standard Luffy stuff. Which is why it may surprise you that this was not the line that Oda originally wanted to go with. In the first draft of this chapter, Oda wanted to make a callback all the way to chapter 1 in celebration of 1000 chapters, and he was going to have Oda say Shanks' line to Higema, which was, "Good reason or not, nobody hurts a friend of mine." And you can see how Oda was building towards this line in the framework of the chapter itself. Because the main point of emotion is the beaten Kinemon asking Luffy to save Wano, and Luffy replies that of course he will because it's his friend's country. And before Luffy hits Kaido, there's a series of flashbacks of all the friends he's made on this Wano quest line, all of whom have been brutally injured and some even killed by this point. So saying Shanks' line in this context would have worked. Good reason or not, nobody hurts a friend of mine, Kaido, bam. And it would have had this lovely full circle effect of the child of chapter 1 fully becoming the mentor he looked up to all the way back then. But ultimately, I do think it was the right choice to give Luffy his tried and tested "I will become the Pirate King" dialogue, because as wonderful as a full circle is a complete circle, and we're not quite there yet. At this stage, we're 1000 chapters in, and Luffy is still very much on his journey. Just as committed as ever, and I think it's very powerful to have him look 2 Emperors of the Sea in the eye and claim that he is going to surpass them right here and right now, because that is the most inflammatory thing possible that he could have said to them. I also think that using Shanks' line might have been a bit redundant, because we know how Luffy reacted to Kinemon, and he said that he'll save his friend's kingdom, the flashback, etc. We all know exactly what Luffy's fighting for without him needing to verbalize it. But it's also important to note Oda's philosophy of Luffy not wanting to be a hero, and that he's not just fighting on behalf of his friends, but also in pursuit of his dream. So I think that using the Pirate King line was a fantastic way to put an exclamation mark on the end of this chapter and bring everything that is Luffy together for chapter 1000, which is also titled Straw Hat Luffy. And Luffy, of course, is not the only person who has ever claimed that he's going to become the Pirate King. Many characters in this series have said exactly that, except not exactly that. This doesn't come across in English, but whenever a character makes the claim that they will become the Pirate King, they say it in their own unique way. Luffy, for example, always says, "Kaizoku oni, ore wa naru," which simply, bluntly, and directly means, "I will become the Pirate King." Sort of. The thing is that Luffy uses very weird grammar. It's not incorrect, it's just odd. And the stronger and more grammatically correct statement would be, "Ore wa kaizoku oni naru," the exact same words, but in a different order. But in the SBS of volume 91, Eiichiro Oda revealed that he purposely had Luffy say this line in his own unique way, because Luffy, as a character, would not use the most correct grammar, and it gives him this unique way of speaking. And Oda is very cognizant about all of his characters having their own unique voices. It's not just Luffy. So let's take Blackbeard. He's also claimed that he's going to become the Pirate King, and remember the straightforward base statement, which is, "Ore wa kaizoku oni naru." However, when Blackbeard makes this claim, what he says is, "Ore ga kaizoku oni naru." And this is such a painfully minor but extremely impactful difference. Luffy and Blackbeard say the same thing in a different order with mostly the same words, except that Luffy uses the particle wa, whilst Blackbeard uses ga. Luffy says ore wa, Blackbeard says ore ga. And the effect of this particle change is to give Blackbeard the impression that he is emphasizing that he and nobody else will become the Pirate King. It's a much more specifically defined goal than Luffy's statement, and puts a slightly sinister twist on the line, showing that Blackbeard is aware of his competition and actively seeking to destroy them, rather than how it sounds when Luffy says it, which is a more pure pursuit of his dream. And another character who we've more recently seen made this claim is Buggy, who also has his own spin on the line. Buggy yells, "Ore ga kaizoku oni narute," which is the same thing that Blackbeard says, except that Buggy adds the particle te onto the end of the sentence, which could mean a couple of things. The first is that it leaves the sentence in a lingering state, creating the sense that Buggy would like to say more, but that more is being left implied. But the other thing it could possibly mean is the implication of a gentle command. And I think that second option makes a bit more sense in the case of Buggy, because he was exclaiming his desire to become the Pirate King over the Denden Mushi to all of his supporters. So in Buggy's case, this wasn't just a declaration, it was a request, it was a soft command to his followers. And so we're left in a place where in English, all three of these characters essentially say the same thing. However, Luffy says that he will become the Pirate King, Blackbeard is saying that only he will become the Pirate King, and Buggy is saying that he will become the Pirate King but with the implied help of others. They're such small differences and pretty difficult to convey in English, but I do really appreciate the nuance in which these characters state their desires, because it just lets us get to know them that much better. Characters that people have been trying to get to know ever since 1997, and this drawing that you're seeing here on screen happens to be the very first publicly published image of Mr. Monkey D. Luffy. This was published in 1996 as a promotion for Romance Dawn version 1, which itself was published in a Jump special issue. Although controversially, according to Eiichiro Oda, it was published in the wrong magazine, a magazine that I have right here. This contains the very first one-shot of what would go on to become known as One Piece. However, it was supposed to be published in the regular edition of Weekly Shonen Jump, which is a very big deal because getting into that sweet main magazine was Oda's dream at the time, and that did eventually go on to happen with Romance Dawn version 2. But the Luffy you see here is a very different character to the one we know and love. This Romance Dawn iteration of Luffy was much smarter and presented a lot more like your typical cool main character, and to be perfectly honest with you, he's a little bit boring. It's a very sanitized Luffy, and I think that that may have been a ploy to get the upper management of Shonen Jump to take One Piece seriously, because there were a lot of concerns about Luffy as a character, and One Piece was almost never published because of them. So I think that Romance Dawn version 1 gave us a curated Luffy, one that fits the description of what the magazine editors were looking for, but not what Oda wanted Luffy to be, which was a heavily flawed but joyous rubber whack job. And there was actually a very insightful interview conducted in 2017 where Oda laid out his frustratingly simple principle of character writing, and in that interview he said, if a character looks cool and has a perfect personality, they end up feeling insincere. So to maintain balance, I always try to give my cool looking characters some kind of flaw in their personality. And that first Romance Dawn Luffy, in my opinion, was insincere. He was trying to be a bit too cool with not enough of a flaw to balance that out, which is something that anyone from any creative field can learn from. One of the things that I feel really holds writers back are how protective of their characters they are, especially if they function as a self-insert for the author, because the writers then either make the characters blandly perfect or the world around them refuses to acknowledge their flaws as flaws. And what I really love about One Piece is that no character at all is immune from being turned into a complete joke. Zoro is often seen as a cool for the sake of cool kind of character, but he's actually such a moron, and not just when he's getting lost. Anytime that he is not wielding sharp metal, Zoro is messing up in some way, shape, or form. So even though a lot of One Piece characters are larger than life and incredibly cool, they still do have these crippling flaws that make them relatable. And again, no one is safe from ridicule. Let's take the coolest of the cool, arguably Mr. Rob Lucci. A few years ago, Eiichiro Oda was messing around with AI, and he decided to feed it one of his drawings of Rob Lucci to see what the AI would turn it into. Eventually, Oda landed on this option, which filled him with so much joy that Oda redrew the section of Egghead Island where Luffy first encounters Lucci and inserted this AI character in his place. Oda actually did this as content for the official One Piece YouTube channel. He sent the host of that channel something in secret. They had no idea what it was, and for some reason it was this. Although you can definitely go too far in the wacky direction at times, which Oda himself has acknowledged, specifically with Sanji. And we discovered this thanks to the Viviacard data book, which decided to show us a cut draft scene originally intended for the raid on Onigashima. After being beckoned by Black Maria, Sanji was originally going to be more heavily and straightforwardly seduced by Black Maria and her ladies during the raid. And in a practice sketch that never made it into the manga, we see Black Maria stating, "I'm ready to do it," with Sanji nervously replying, "It," and then either Black Maria or another one of her ladies then says, "You can strip off our kimonos. Doesn't that sound fun?" With Sanji replying, "I'll happily die here," which was a scene that I guess was deemed a bit too horny even for Sanji. It's not that Shonen Jump is a magazine that would not publish that, but I do think it crosses a line for what One Piece is. However, it is an interesting insight into the mind of Eiichiro Oda and how he balances the intrusive thoughts with the telling of peak fiction, which is often subject to outside influence as well. For example, Amazon Lily was not originally planned to happen right after Sabri Archipelago, but because one of Oda's daughters would be starting school soon at the time, he moved Amazon Lily up to get all of that pervy art out of the way so that his daughter wouldn't have a hard time with the weekly releases. And also, going back to Sanji, without Oda's daughters, we would be missing a huge chunk of story about him. In 2022, Oda said that he decided Sanji would be a quadruplet because one of his daughters was a fan of the anime Osomatsu-san, which featured a cast of sextuplets. His daughter loved this anime, and Oda said that because he wanted his daughter to love him, that he decided to create the Vinsmoke siblings in a similar vein to the sextuplets in Osomatsu-san. And Oda also takes pretty heavy inspiration from other media sources as well, such as Oda himself being a massive fan of Star Wars, so much so that something of a crossover was organized for the Japanese release of The Force Awakens in 2015, where before the film, a short animation of the Straw Hats dressed up as Star Wars characters played, with the voice actors doing classic quotes, like having Usopp say the "No, I am your father" line as Darth Vader. Here's the crazy thing about this though, this was not being used to promote Star Wars, because if you're seeing this animation, then you've already paid to go and see Star Wars. This was actually used to promote One Piece film Gold, which released shortly after in 2016, and it's hard to say how much it helped with The Force Awakens grossing approximately $100 million dues in Japan, whilst film Gold grossed half that at approximately $50 million, which is still lots of money. I would like that much money, but then again, I can't be bothered to make a movie. But for more in-depth and dare I say miscellaneous facts about One Piece, then give this next video a go. I'm not entirely sure what it will be because the YouTube algorithm judges which video you're most likely to click. So what I will say is trust in the curation and give the next video the hardest click it is that you can muster, because I know you and we both know that you want more fictional pirates.